Thank you all for joining us again this week. It's good to be back with all of you. As I shared with you last week, we have turned our attention to planning for the spring semester, reviewing our public health protocols for any adjustments that might be necessary. Our public health program is shaped by a number of factors: local and national guidelines, current scientific and medical advances such as testing and vaccines, guidance from our Chief Public Health Officer and our Public Health Advisory Group, comprised of faculty colleagues from across the university, including leading public health authorities from our medical center, the experience we have on our campuses, and the current trajectory of the pandemic. I'd like to focus today on this final element, the current trajectory of the pandemic. I'll provide a sense of what we're seeing in Europe, which the WHO has characterized as the epicenter of COVID-19 right now. I'll provide some context on how vaccination is impacting these outbreaks and what we are learning about our layered public health approach. And finally, we'll turn to what we might expect when it comes to the future direction of the pandemic. Joining us today is Dr. Rebecca Katz, an expert in global health security, diplomacy, and emerging infectious diseases. A faculty member at our medical center and our School of Foreign Service, she directs Georgetown's Center for Global Health Science and Security. She has spent many years studying global health emergencies, has advised state, national, and global leaders working on pandemic response, and serves as a member of our Public Health Advisory Group here at Georgetown. She'll join us in just a few moments. So first, let me turn to the situation in Europe, where many countries are facing a fourth wave of the pandemic. Some countries in Europe and Eastern Europe, Germany, France, the Netherlands, Ukraine, and Russia, are experiencing a significant surge in cases of COVID-19. It is not only cases that are rising, hospitalizations and deaths are also rising. Dr. Hans Klug, the WHO's regional director for Europe, reports that hospitalizations across Europe have doubled in the past 4 weeks. Countries are responding by instituting new public health measures. France is moving to require all adults above 65 to receive a booster. The Netherlands is encouraging everyone to work from home, and hours have been restricted for non-essential shops, and no more than 4 guests are allowed in residences. Denmark will reinstitute requirements to enter certain public places, a proof of vaccine, a negative test, or proof of recent recovery from COVID-19. However, a few countries in Europe, such as Portugal and Spain, seem to be protected from this most recent surge. And what do these countries share in common? They have higher vaccination rates compared with those countries experiencing a surge. At the same time, we are seeing another dynamic emerge when it comes to the impact of vaccination. The overall vaccination rate is just part of the picture. We also have to look at vaccination rates of our local communities at the state and county level. And we have to look at the vaccination rates within certain populations. A community or a population that has a low vaccination rate is at greater risk of contracting COVID-19 and of experiencing the worst impacts of the disease. We have to watch this situation carefully here in the United States. Our overall vaccination rate is lower than many of the countries in Europe that are experiencing this new surge. Within the United States, some states have significantly lower vaccination rates than others. And our vaccination rate of vulnerable populations is also lower than in places like the UK. Our experience this past summer provides a sense of the impact. We know that our older populations are those who typically experience the worst outcomes from COVID-19. In the United Kingdom, nearly all, 97% of adults 65 and older, are vaccinated against COVID-19. In the United States, it's 10% lower, 87%. And yet, while both of our countries experienced a rise in COVID-19 cases this summer, the United States experienced worse outcomes. Vaccination is a powerful tool to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and its worst impacts. It is essential we reach high levels of vaccination in every community. Vaccination, however, is not a solution on its own. As some of our institutions across the country, even here at Georgetown, we have seen clusters of cases emerge even though 98% of our population is vaccinated. This is why a layered public health program continues to be invaluable. Vaccines are most effective when used in combination with other measures: testing, isolation, mask wearing, good ventilation. This is especially true against a COVID-19 variant like the Delta variant, which is much more transmissible than previous strains. While vaccination provides significant benefits, including protection against the worst impacts of the disease, it does not fully prevent transmission or mild or asymptomatic cases of COVID-19. Our layered public health program adds protection to the advantages provided by vaccination. Not only is our layered public health program important in helping us prevent transmission, it also provides a framework to respond when cases are detected. If we see small clusters of positive cases emerge, like we did in late October, our process of testing, contact tracing, and isolation is able to break the chain of transmission and keep the outbreak under control. We have learned a great deal through our experiences of this semester with our community back on our campuses. Over these remaining weeks of the semester, as we prepare for the spring, we are continuing to review our layered public health program and will be sharing any updates with our community to ensure we are providing the very best protection we can. As we turn to the future of the pandemic, I'd like to welcome Dr. Rebecca Katz to our conversation. Dr. Katz, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, leads our Center for Global Health Science and Security. She's provided many years of leadership on the national and global stage when it comes to global health emergencies, and we are deeply grateful for her contributions to our community at our medical center and at our School of Foreign Service, and as a member of our Public Health Advisory Group.
Rebecca, thank you so much for taking this time to be with us today. Let's jump right in. Just a moment ago, I described some of the circumstances we're seeing in countries in Europe where they are experiencing a new surge in COVID-19 cases. I also talked a little bit about why we might see a rise in COVID-19 cases in a highly vaccinated community such as ours. For many people, it can be confusing why we continue to see surges in positive cases of COVID-19, despite the medical advances and public health measures we have in place. Can you help us interpret what is happening right now?
Yeah, I'm happy to try. I think up front, it's important to know that this all gets a little murky. And I think one of the reasons it does is because every community is experiencing this pandemic differently at different points in time. And you're constantly kind of watching what's happening around the world, trying to figure out what's relevant to your own community, but also knowing that we are not homogeneous here, that this has been happening community by community as the virus spreads around the world, and particularly as Delta has spread around the world, which is so highly communicable. I think that, we are very fortunate to be in a community that has an extraordinarily high vaccination rate. That's not true everywhere, whether it's due to hesitancy or disinformation or access. And I think the peak in Europe that we're seeing right now, and first of all, when we say peak, the daily the case counts in Europe are rising, they are high, but the emergency actions that are being taken in France, the discussions about re-implementing some more aggressive measures in Germany, they are still way less the number of cases than we are seeing in the United States every single day. Remember, we're still seeing approximately 70,000 new cases, new reported cases every single day, approximately 1,000 deaths every single day. Now that gets lost in our community because we're not experiencing that, or many of us are fortunate not to be. So it looks like what's happening in Europe is a combination of lower vaccination rates. So what looked like some successful efforts early on, and some countries where have been extremely successful, like Portugal, you have other countries that are hovering around 60, 65% vaccination rate. You also have waning immunity from amongst those who are vaccinated early on. And then you've had this relaxation in policies or even complacency around things like masks, given how everybody's experiencing the waves of the virus differently. So but I also think it's really important to remember that the focus of most of the cases in Europe are amongst the unvaccinated. And we know that the vaccines are not 100% effective. They range in effectiveness. They are best at preventing serious infection, which is why even though if we see numbers rise, the severe cases and hospitalizations among the vaccinated remain low. And I think there was one statistic I was looking at today, which is worth repeating, that right now in the United States, amongst the reported cases, they are 6 times higher among the unvaccinated than the vaccinated. And the deaths are 12 times higher amongst the unvaccinated than vaccinated. So this is really what we are looking at is very much amongst the most concern is amongst the unvaccinated population.
Oh, thank you. Now, how will we know when we are turning a corner in the pandemic? What comes next? What are some of the possibilities that we should be prepared for?
That's the question of the day. And that's the one that everybody's discussing in every corner, in every grocery store, on every news program, because people are extraordinarily tired and everyone's trying to figure out what comes next. And I think there's a little bit of getting out your crystal ball and trying to guess. But I think that if I was to guess what's going to happen, this isn't going to be over if we think of this as a global pandemic for a while. But where we are going to be moving towards is deciding almost community by community and individual by individual, do you have enough tools in the toolkit to reduce risk enough that you can move to a place where you are living with the risk of this virus and moving towards what might be considered like the new normal. We've always talked about a new normal, and that we keep redefining what that new normal actually is. But, I think that we at Georgetown and under your leadership have what I would consider a COVID cautious community, where we have emphasized protecting the community as much as the individuals. And which seems very consistent with the values of the institution. And I believe that we'll be approaching a point sometime in the next couple of months where there'll be a sufficient level of protection. So whether it's vaccines and potential booster shots, and maybe even regular booster shots, depending on how much your immunity wanes with subsequent shots, the the use of new therapeutics, including pills that you can keep at home. Now there's that are now going through approval processes, and then additional protective measures for certain environments, as well as all on top of this better infrastructure that we're creating in terms of things like air filtration. You can start to look towards what would be a I don't know if you would call it a normal situation, but getting to a point where we live with this. We live with this. We understand that there may be risk involved. Individuals might take different levels of risk. If you are immunocompromised, you may choose to be wearing a mask every time you walk out the door for the next year or 2 or 3, or maybe you're not immunocompromised, but you've decided to wear a mask every time you get on the metro. So I think there's going to be decisions that people make, but I would expect that we will get to a point of having a different kind of risk-benefit calculation or risk calculation for our community, probably after we get through the winter months, is what my guess would be.
Okay, thank you.
I promise like clean answers, right? All murky answers.
I appreciate it. Now, as a scholar and a researcher with your team at the Center for Global Health Science and Security at Georgetown, you think not only about the response to a pandemic, but also what we can be doing on a global scale to prepare. What are we learning, both about what it means to respond, but also to prepare for a future pandemic?
Yeah, this pandemic has really exposed all the cracks in the system. And which means we need to fix a lot of things. We have to, in some ways, fix the tools that we've had, and in others, identify where those gaps are, where we need to create a brand new set of tools. We basically need a revised global health security architecture. And that spans from community preparedness to better norms and standards and governance. And that, there is a tremendous amount of work to be done. Unfortunately, there's already waning interest. And so we need to make sure that we can keep the attention of the world so that we don't go back into we call it the cycle of panic to neglect. And there's this deep fear that we're heading back towards that neglect that neglect space. But I think as we think from our perch about what needs to be done, there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of strengthening institutions like the World Health Organization, like building stronger disease surveillance capacity, like supporting the workforce, both the public health and the healthcare workforce. There's work that needs to be focused on in terms of thinking about what our norms and standards are. So as we think about international law, as we look at the international health regulations, there's a lot of dialogue around creating a new international instrument. There's work that's going to have to be done on thinking about how we pay for all of this, because it's not cheap. And that's work that the G20 has been considering. And then there's thinking about what governance looks like, and oversight and accountability, and setting up processes that are transparent, that the world can look to and understand.
I'd like to close by asking you about the issues that you are most focused on right now. What are the most important issues we can be thinking about?
Yeah, I break that down in my head a little bit between what's happening in the current pandemic response, and then what do we think about for the next pandemic. And on the current pandemic, it is, if we think on the global scale, this is about manufacturing, it's about distribution of both vaccines and therapeutics, and trying to get those medical countermeasures to all populations around the world. And we still have a real problem with equity at the moment. I believe that there are more booster shots currently being given than there are first shots being given in populations in lower and middle income countries. And that takes leadership. So we're going to need leadership for the world to focus not just on the fact that the pandemic isn't over yet, but also on all the second order effects. So, the impacts on loss of education, particularly for girls and migrant populations. So there is, there's going to be a lot of work that has to be done on the current pandemic and the effects of, but at the same time, You asked what I'm mostly focused on right now is thinking about how we revise our international legal instruments and what that global governance of disease regime really looks like. So how do we work to establish to amend the international health regulations, what the dialogue around a potential new international instrument might look like? How do we think about setting up the norms and standards that will support a fair and equitable regime for information sharing, so that when we talk about we need faster disease surveillance, we need to be able to share all the information, we need to make sure that there is some type of access and benefit regime in place for that. And then we've been working for years on trying to figure out what things cost. And so I am particularly interested in figuring out what kind of mechanisms we put in place for funding and financing health security over time.
Wow. Rebecca, I can't thank you enough for sharing your insights and reflections. You have provided invaluable leadership over these past now nearly 23 months in our response to COVID-19 here at Georgetown, and I know beyond. And we could not be more grateful for your expertise and your service. And thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you all for joining us. I wish you the very best in the coming days and weeks as we reach the conclusion of our fall semester. Take care of yourselves and take care of everyone around you. For every Hoya, everywhere.